CIS30A. This video is going to be on your course project that's going to be required for submission at the end of the semester. So I'm going to go over the course project requirements and the parts that's necessary for submission. So in this project, you will find the information in Canvas in the module called Course Project. And if you navigate toward the end, after your weekly module, you will find the course project. You will have approximately 3 weeks to work on this, so I just want to make sure that you have the information that you need in order to complete it. So when you access the module, you will go ahead and click on the course project information. And on this page, there is a document that provides you with the information about the course project. And this video will also be posted here. So in this project, you are required to complete 3 parts, and the submission needs to be done in Canvas by the due date. And you will need to select one project options based on the listed options that's provided. And each option will give you some details about what you need to write as far as the program in Python. So in the first option is the business Python program, and in this option you will write a Python program to place an order and set an appointment for food delivery of goods or foods or services for the business. It could be for a restaurant, a grocery, mobile pet spa, mobile car detailer, house cleaning, etc. So that will be your choice. Although it's not required, but you do have an option to use TK Calendar, and we will go over TK Enter. I will teach you how to be able to incorporate module like TK Calendar. Now, remember that when you write the program, if you're using an IDE, you need to also install the module, the packages inside your IDE. Downloading it on your computer will not necessarily allow you to incorporate the library inside your IDE. It has to be properly linked. So please look at the notes information and the exercises that will be required. Now, the program doesn't require you to have the graphical user interface, so you just need to go down the list and use it as a checklist to write your program. So in option 1, the business Python program, it should prompt the user to select the products or the services and set up an appointment for delivery date. It could be shipping delivery date or delivery of goods and service to the home. The program should display the user selection on the screen, and it should output a text file that contains the order summary as a receipt or an invoice. And technically, I require you to meet the following components. The program needs to have comments throughout the program. You don't need to comment every line, but you do need to include comment in various parts of your program. You will need to use variables and lists to store and access data. So if you're using a list, you need to implement for loop or some kind of iteration approach to be able to access your data. You can use tuple or dictionary in place of a list if you choose not to use the list. So you need to use variables, lists, or tuple or dictionary, and that will be 20 points. Additionally, you need to use string object to display and control text output. So you can incorporate string, and that will be 10 points. You need to have at least 2 or more functions, and you need to use function call or method call in order to execute the task in your program. So you have the flexibility to define your own functions and make sure that you have function call in the program. You will need to implement loop, such as for loop or while loop, or both. So all you need is one or the other, or if you choose to use both, that will be fine. That will be 10 points. You need to include conditional statement if else, if else, and that will be 10 points. So you can choose to do nested if, or if else, or if else. It doesn't have to be all. Also, you need to create a module, which is another file, and that file needs to be tied into your program. So in the chapters, we touch on how to use modules, so go back to that exercise if you need to review. It needs to contain at least 2 classes and 1 subclass. So in the 2 classes, you can have a parent class and a child class, so it needs to be 2 classes, and that will be 20 points. You will have to create 1 or more objects, and you will need to use 1 or more methods in each class with the object. That will be 20 points. You need to implement error detection using Python built-in exceptions, and that will be 10 points. And built-in exceptions can be just to detect and validate input or other approaches, so that will be up to you. You need to implement file operations and file output, as this program requires that you output a receipt or an invoice. And if you integrate graphical user interface or UI, that will be a bonus 30 points. So the last item is not required, but if you do incorporate UI, you will get some bonus points. So that is option 1. For option 2, you will write a program in Python for personal finance tracking. And the program should allow the user to create a budget, input monthly or weekly income, and expenses and savings. So it could be investments, retirement savings, or personal savings. That will be up to you. So the program needs to have some way to be able to track income, expenses, and savings. Now, I included the optional libraries for you to use, but you don't have to use these libraries specifically. And these libraries are mainly geared for, data analysis, and you often see that these type of libraries would be incorporated in some kind of financial analysis type of application. And for your program, you should prompt the user to input periodic, could be monthly or weekly or biweekly, budget, income, expenses, and saving goals. The program should allow the user to modify data over time, and it should output the summary income, expense, and savings in text file. It should contain the same technical components as option 1. It needs to include comments. That will be 10 points. It needs to use variables and lists or dictionary or tuple for data storage and access. That will be 20 points. You need to use string object to display and control text output. That will be 10 points. Your program needs to have 2 or more functions defined, and you need to use function call to execute the task in the program. You need to implement loop. It could be for or while loop or both. That will be 20 points. So you can choose one or the other, or if you choose to use both, that will be fine. It needs to include conditional statements such as if, or if else, or if else. You don't have to use all of them, but you need to use at least one, and that will be 10 points. Your program needs to use non-built-in modules, so you have to write or customize a module, which is another Python file, and you need to be able to import in the appropriate areas of the custom module. That will be 20 points. Your program needs to contain at least 2 classes and 1 subclass. That will be 30 points. It needs to include 1 or more objects, so you need to create at least 1 or more object and use 1 or more method in each class. It needs to implement error detection for the built-in exceptions, and so you can use try and accept, or finally, that will be up to you, so that will be 10 points. You need to implement file operations and file output, as the program requires that you need to output file. For a summary of your personal expenses, that will be 20 points. If you incorporate user interface or graphical user interface, that will be a bonus of 30 points. You don't have to do that, but if you wish to use TK Enter, which will be covered at the end of the semester in your program, that will be giving you bonus points. Then in option 3 is geared for security students, or if you're interested in doing a keylogger. And keylogging is just a way that it will record whatever that is typed in on the keyboard, on the computer. And in cybersecurity, we would use keylogger for assessment purposes, or in the attacker standpoint, it would use for malicious intention. So in option 3, you will write a keylogger program that records the user input. Some of the libraries are suggested here for you to use, such as PyInput library, and I put the link here so you can review the documentation. This library is used to control and monitor input devices such as mouse and keyboard. You can also use Listener API with Python CAN library. This allows you to use the built-in functions from those library and class and objects or methods to be able to access data buffer, also to create log files of data that has been input by the user. Doing this project is going to give you the foundation in understanding how to work with logs and how to be able to incorporate some of the common libraries, especially on hardware level. The program should entice a user to enter some kind of information, so I will leave it up to you to be creative about that. And the program should record keyboard input and save the input in a text file. So if the user types certain thing or strikes certain key, it should be able to detect that. And you can find some resources with PyInput library. Additionally, the program should output a text file that contains the input information from the user, and also having the same technical requirements as the other options. So your program should have comments. Like I said, you don't need to comment every line, but you can comment throughout the program. You can use variables and lists or dictionary or tuple, and that will be 20 points to store data and to be able to access data for later use. You need to incorporate string object to display and control text output. That will be 10 points. So if you just print using text, that will probably meet the criteria there. You need to define 2 or more functions and use function call to execute tasks in the program. So you have to use def and define your functions and what you want to execute in that function. That will be 20 points. You need to implement loop, such as for loop or while loop. That will be 10 points. You need to include conditional statement, if or if else, or if else. You can use one of these, just like the loop. You can use one or both. So the conditional statement, that will be 10 points. You will need to create a module, which is a separate Python file. So that way you can import in the content of that module into your main Python program, and that will be 20 points. So module doesn't have to be very complex and advanced. It can be just using for file output, or it can be used for, generating logs, however you wanted to approach that. Your program needs to contain at least 2 classes and 1 subclass. So we need to make sure that we have the classes specified, and that will be 20 points. Your program needs to include 1 or more objects. So you need to create the object and use 1 or more method in each class to access the object. So that will be 20 points. You need to implement error detection using built-in exceptions, and exceptions could be for input validations, or it can be just tracking possible error or preventing possible error in the program. That would be 10 points. Your program needs to implement file operations, as we mentioned that your program needs to have some kind of file output for what the user has typed. So you need to implement file operations and file output. That will be 20 points. And the bonus points are for user interface. So if you incorporate buttons, menus, if you want them to have a text box so they can type in the password, that will be the bonus points. UI is not required, it's optional. So the project is broken into 3 parts. Part 1 is going to be documentation. I just need a brief summary, so at least 1 page, double space, about your program goals. What are you trying to achieve in your program based on the option that you have selected? The functionality of your program, so you can discuss how it's supposed to be utilized and what kind of technical implementation that you have added to make sure that you would address your program goals, and then your target audience, who is going to be using your program. You also need to mention the strength and the weakness of your program, as all software has some form of weakness. So what will be some of the strength and some of the weak area in your program, and what needs to be improved, or your suggestion for improvement in the future iteration of that program. So for the documentation, it will be 1 page double space, and you need to submit the document that contains the program description. So this document should provide the description based on what's highlighted here. The second part of part 1 is your pseudocode. So writing pseudocode helps you plan out the program from the start of the program to the end of the program. Now everything needs to be pre-planned and mapped out, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but some of the areas that I'm going to look for is going to be branching in conditions. So if you implement if else, and so on, you need to make sure that that needs to be added. Or if you're using a loop, like a while loop or a for loop, you need to make sure that the loop is going to be included in your pseudocode. So pseudocode is supposed to be in plain English. Basically, it outlines your program from the beginning to the end, and it should contain a list of processes, of subtasks, of conditions and branches in your program. If something happens, if that's true, what will be executed, and so on. Here is some tutorial on how to write pseudocode, and both of these are going to be equate to 100 points. So the documentation with the program description is 60 points. Your pseudocode is 40 points. For part 2, that's also due at the end of the semester, this is the Python program itself based on the option that you have selected. So once you choose the option, you would need to provide the documentation, write the pseudocode, and part 2 will be your .py file. That will be 2 files, one for the module and one for the main. So the program is going to base on your selected option. You need to test the limitation of your program, and you need to submit your Python files in a zip folder or in separate files. You can upload them, and that will be worth 200 points based on the criteria, the technical criteria that was listed under each of the options. Then part 3, which is 50 points, you need to complete a survey that's going to be of yourself or your teammates. In this one, if we're not doing in team, you can just rate yourself. You will need to evaluate how you're performing, what areas you need to improve, and it's a good way to really look at what you have learned and what you need to grow as a programmer. And for the second part, you will need to create a portfolio that would include your documentation, your pseudocode, and your file. Okay. You can upload them, but remember, make sure that you share permissions and make sure that I can publicly view it. So a good way to test this is to use a browser, put in your portfolio URL, and be able to see if it can be open. So if it's not able to see publicly using another browser, if it's not able to be seen using another browser, then you need to make sure that you enable public permission, because Google site is tied to your Google Drive, and you need to make sure that the container or the folder that you put the files in, or the file itself, needs to have some form of permission. Now you can also take a screen capture of your code and your pseudocode, and you can put that up. This is your own portfolio. You will maintain it. It's a good way to really document your achievement and your success. It's a good way to really show future employers what you have done. You can also record videos, take pictures, add some information, buttons, and make it look nice. But you don't have to spend a lot of time doing this. You can just simply upload or take a picture and add that to your Google site. But make sure that we test the URL using another browser and making sure that it's publicly viewable. So if I'm not able to see the portfolio, I won't be able to grade it at the end of the semester. So make sure you check that. In Canvas, you can simply, when you submit, there is going to be a tab for URL link, and you can add your URL there. Or if you're unable to find it, you can put it into a document and upload it, okay, along with your self-survey. So with this, you will have a general idea on what you have to do. And this is on the project information page. I included GitHub how-to. This allows you to get some information on how to use GitHub if you never used it before. In a GitHub repository, you need to have a README file, and the README file generally includes your program information, who is the creator, when you created it, what is the program about. Now, GitHub page is, it needs to be edited as an HTML page. So in order to make it look nice, you would need to be able to modify it using HTML. But GitHub is not required. For programming, we normally use GitHub to manage our revisions in the program over time, and you can use GitHub to share your source code. For project part 1, this is where you would submit your documentation and your pseudocode. So for your documentation, the program description, that needs to be in document, either the .doc or the .pdf file. Your pseudocode can be included on the same document or a separate document that needs to be a .doc or a .pdf file. Okay. And I also put note here that pseudocode should outline the program from start to finish, and it cannot be source code. So make sure that you check out the tutorial if you don't know how to write pseudocode. And you can see the rubric there. So when you need to submit project part 1, this is where you would upload the files, your pseudocode and your program summary. For project part 2, depending on the option that you selected, you will write your program to meet the requirements that are listed here. And the requirements will then be used in the grade rubric to assess what you have achieved in your program. So I will use this rubric and go through and make sure that you have all the areas that's required. When you submit your program files, that should need to be, you can put it in a zip folder, or you can attach the Python files to as an upload to this assignment. The same document that you saw earlier in the project information is provided here in case you need to look at your options. The last part of your project is your self-evaluation and your e-portfolio. You will click the link to assess your performance in the program, how you met the expectation of the program and the project requirement, and what you have learned in during the process. So make sure that we do project self-evaluation. Also, we need to create an e-portfolio using Google Site. This is one of the products that's easiest to use and it's free. And again, Google Site is tied to your Google Drive. So if you upload your documentation to your Google Drive and link it to your Google Site, make sure that we change specific file permissions and make sure that it's publicly viewable. And again, I'm going to mention this again because many students submit their e-portfolio and I was not able to see the content of it. So a good way to test it is to copy the URL, open up another browser like Edge or Firefox if you're using Chrome, and then test it with another browser. If you're able to view it in the other browser, that means that I'm able to view it. When you submit, when you click submit, you will find a URL tab, or if you cannot find it in the Canvas submission, then you can attach a document that has a link, or you can add that in the comment. And each part will be 25 points. There are tutorial videos on how to make an e-portfolio using Google Site. Okay, so if you're not sure how to do it, you can also view the tutorial video. I will use the rubric that contains the information that's listed there for the points assessment. So in your project, you have 3 parts. And my advice for you would be, even though you have some parts that are incomplete, you should still submit them. If your Python program doesn't work out perfectly, but you have attempted, you need to submit it. Okay? As it weighs quite a bit in your final project grade, you want to make sure that you have something submitted for all parts, or at least some of the parts. Because if you receive 0 on these, that will have an impact greatly on your overall final grade, even if you have done extra credit. Extra credit will help in the deficient area. Sometimes it could be final exam, or it could be final project or missing assignments, but they do not weigh heavily. They're intended to really lift up your grade in the area that you are deficient in. So I suggest that work on your course project from now until the end of the semester. I'm available for questions if you have questions or need help. So please contact me if you need help. And I also have office hours on Tuesday, 4 to 5. So if you need me to check out your program, or if you're stuck on a certain area of your program, please contact me. There will also be a final exam, and I will release the review and exam information so that way you're able to prepare yourself for the final exam. And final exam will be multiple choice. So along with the course project, you will have a final exam in the class, as this is a 3-unit course. Please let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for watching the video.